Hello guys, this is NJ from the MBTI tier lists. In today's episode, we're going to be contemplating on the question of which MBTI personality type would be the best doctor. Now, what we're talking about here is like a basic doctor, like among others. We're not talking about like any specialty. I like surgeons, for example, would award for another tier lists altogether. The same thing for like psychiatrists. These are such, specific specialties that requires a special skill sets. But like an overall doctor, that's what we're talking about here. I'm gonna start this tier list by going through like what would be the best doctor. We're talking about like the S tier doctor here. And I'm gonna do it to kind of like illustrate the point of like what would it require to be the best doctor, and then we can go to the rest of the lists, to understand like why none of the other types would be the best doctors basically. Let's just say that let's just go and say that like I'm like an ISTJ would basically be the very kind of like epitome of a doctor. What you need as a doctor is hand skills and brains and like the capacity of doing like analysis of medical matters. You need some emotional intelligence. I actually don't think that like doctors need that much. Like I like emotional intelligence like overrated for being a doctor. Being a doctor is actually quite a technical like skill set. Like you need to know stuff. You need to know how to do stuff, and it's a highly analytical craft that you still have to use hands in many cases, and you have to know a lot of stuff. And that's the thing that like many people might not understand about being a doctor is that like medical science is actually an insanely like memory heavy field of science. There's like a completely unreasonable quantity of like trivia that you have to memorize by heart. Medical school is literally the longest school you can go to. It's like 6 years or something. I don't know how long it is, like 4 or 6 years or something. But but like in medical school, like you are bombarded with an insane quantity of medical data, like medical mechanics and anatomy and pathology and this is all like to be memorized. It's really hard to learn medical science by just like quote unquote like getting it. It's not the kind of a science that you can get. It's the kind of a science that you have to memorize. Because all of the bodily functions are so random that there's so many like random little things going on in the human body that is completely like unique to that portion of the body that it's just like it's all memorization. Like I'm gonna be going to nursing school, and I have Googled it, and I have read the Reddit conversations, and even like nurses are complaining when they go to nursing school on like just like how much do they have to memorize stuff. Medical science it's not like a high IQ science. It doesn't require like massive intelligence. And medical school and nursing school, they're not like hard schools because you have to be a genius to get through it. They are hard schools because you have to memorize so much random shit. And doctors have to memorize a completely fucking like unquestionably unreasonable quantity of random shits. Like doctors are basically walking and talking medical Wikipedias. And ISTJs, of all of the types in the system, ISTJs hands down have like just like the best capacity for memorizing random shits. There's like literally no other type that can memorize things as much as an ISTJ. They're like ISTJs, whatever they get into, they become the Wikipedias of that shit. So like ISTJs like are just like the ideal doctor for all intents and purposes. They can memorize the shit out of everything. Um, um, that they're super meticulous and careful. They're super good with their hands. They have high level analytical skills. And then they have that just like a little bit of like emotional intelligence with the tertiary FI going on and so on. Now, what I have to say here is that like you have to separate also like doctors from like medical scientists, in the sense that like if you were going to be doing medical science, I like ISTJs are a little bit too uptight to be great scientists, to be honest. They're probably like the least open-minded people out there when it comes to like crazy ideas and scientific revolutions and that kind of shit. But we're not talking about like revolutionizing medical science. We're talking about like you being a doctor and you doing your job. Like you taking the known information and applying it in real time with your patients to save their asses. Okay? And for that purpose, ISTJs like S tier. Yeah, okay. So the other type that I like that I think there's only like really two types that get to the S tier. The other would be like an ESTP basically. Now ESTPs might not have the greatest like memories and so on, but like they're the greatest with their hands. Their analytical skills are super high, and they have that tertiary FE, so that they're like brilliant with people. Being a doctor is like you have to like be able to like do many kinds of like physical like medical procedures. In many cases being a doctor is like really hands-on and so on. Now okay, there are a lot of like things doctors do and doctor specialties that like you don't use your hands that much. But a doctor is basically expected to be able to deliver a baby, do the stitches on a wound. You're expected to be able to intubate and do like perform like basic surgery, do like, central lines, art lines. It's all doctors, so it's like doctors need to be good with their hands just in case. And in many specialties, they do these operations as well. Which is why I like an ESTP kind of like is the perfect package for doing it. Like, they might not be able to memorize everything as well as the ISTJ, but they're good with their hands. They have high brains with TI, and they have the people skills. So, these two guys, I think, like would just be the greatest. So let's go to the A tier. So an ENTJ, okay, I like intuitives. Kind of like wouldn't make for like S tier doctors, because I like intuitives are a little bit too abstract and so on. I actually do that like when you're dealing with like medical data and analysis. It's like really kind of like almost like sensor analysis. Now, okay, yeah, like intuition is a super powerful function for doing the analysis and so on. With ENTJs, you have like an inferior FI, so like while having emotional intelligence is not that important for a doctor, it's like I can't for the life of me put an ENTJ to the S tier when they have like inferior introverted feeling going on. ENTJs have high social skills, and they would be at the S tier when it comes to their analytical skills and their hand skills. Like TESE is super strong for doing medical procedures. The TENI combo is the greatest for doing the medical analysis. So like ENTJs would by all means be super competent doctors. But once again, like the S tier, like these are like perfect doctors. They kind of like don't have a weakness for the job at hand, like at all. Because both of these guys at the S tier, like they have that tertiary feeling function that you're like a little bit more compassionate than an ENTJ. So it's like ENTJs would be at the S tier, but they have an inferior FI. And that is why I think that they wouldn't be like the perfect doctor. That they have like a slight weakness, that their social skills are high enough that they're going to get away with it. But that like inferior FI, that is like a little bit you can't say that the ENTJ would be the perfect doctor. Okay, so the other guy, an INTJ, with INTJs, they have even greater analytical skills than ENTJs. That the NITE is more powerful than TENI. With INTJs, they also have tertiary FI, so they actually have some emotional intelligence usually. With INTJs, the problem is that they do have like inferior SE. So they're basically executing all the physical stuff that a doctor has to do with their TE alone, basically. So INTJs would also be at the S tier, hands down, but ESTPs and ISTJs are just like so much better with the hand shits. That I like INTJs also like can't pick a like S tier. That they have like a little bit of a weakness. ESTPs don't have a weakness. INTJs, they have a little bit of a weakness with the inferior SE. In doing the medical procedures and so on. And that being said, I don't think like INTJs could do it. That like the TE alone, enables the INTJ to do a completely feasible, competent job, even with the physical procedures and so on. And INTJs would be the greatest, medical analysts, with their NITE combo. But it's like for the life of me, I can't put them to the S tier, either. Like with like some more like abstract doctor specialties, they basically would be S tier, but I'm going to leave them like overall A tier because of the inferior SE. Okay. Now the other guys at the A tier, I think, would be an ESTJ, for example. ESTJs have even greater hand skills than ENTJs probably. They don't have that like level of analytical minds than these guys, but the TENE combo, TENE or TESINE is enough to do the medical analysis still. ESTJs tend to be great detectives, with that TESINE combo, and so I like it's completely feasible for doing the medical analysis. They also have the inferior FI, so for the life of me, I just can't put them to the S tier either. And they're also, ESTJs are maybe lacking in the analysis department just a little bit. They're like all of these other guys before an ESTJ like do even better analysis. But the ESTJs would still be doing like good medical analysis compared to many other types. Okay. So the other guy that I would put to the A tier would be basically like an ISFJ. The ISFJs are very similar to the ISTJ. That they're super careful, they're meticulous, so they're super good with the hands, and with the SI, once again, they can memorize the shits out of everything. The SI-TI combo might just be just like barely enough to do like feasible medical analysis of even more complex matters. They would be like a little bit weaker than even ESTJs on the medical analysis, like probably they would have to like develop their TI, do the max. But ISFJs, they would be like super high, people skills and emotional intelligence. So ISFJs would be super awesome doctors. But I'm going to leave them at the kind of like the end of the A tier here because their like medical analysis just like can't compete with any of these guys basically. But I like that they might just like have just enough capability for doing that. And so on. So then the B tier, who would be at the B tier? I like an ISTP. Like ISTP is great with their hands, super meticulous. Like some of the highest level medical analysis. But ISTPs, they have like an inferior FE, which I think like in this case is just like even worse than for ENTJs and ESTJs, the inferior FI, because like ENTJs and ESTJs, they actually have usually super high social skills. Like ISTPs are just kind of like really just like out of it with people. I like ENTJs and ESTJs that they're extroverts. They kind of like get along with people better, and I think like they also like notice more things about people. I like ISTPs can be just like a little bit out of it with people somehow. And they're missing out on things, but it's like not even communicating or anything. Like ENTJs and ESTJs, they communicate, they will talk with you, and they will ask questions. They have so high social skills. So ISTPs have the problem of like, making assumptions about people that they don't like really verify or anything. Like ISTPs are the most competent guy who's always lacking some like information because they just don't communicate, and that is a bit of a problem for being a doctor. ISTPs are always going on a mission. And they're almost like always like going like blindfolded, that they just look at the instructions and then they go and do it without asking anybody. They don't like talk with anybody. And that's where they go wrong, and so on. And that's their problem. So like that's like really problematic for like a doctor. So ISTPs would be the hyper competent doctor, who just like doesn't communicate with like people enough, basically. So I think they would be like kind of like B tier for that reason. So I like ENFPs, and basically ENTPs, but like ENFPs. Like ENFPs would be great at like doing the medical analysis with the NETE combo. They would be super high level with people, compassionate and interactive, and they would communicate. ENFP's strength would be the exact thing that would be an ISTP weakness, which is like communication. Like ENFPs are hyper communicators. ENFPs would be some of the greatest people, maybe after like an ESTP or something. Just like talk with the person so much, like bombard the guy with questions that like ENFPs would be figuring out what the hell is wrong with you in like a really fast-paced manner. And that is such a strength that this like and that combined with the medical analysis to go with it, like ENFPs would be really awesome in like figuring out what the hell is going on. The problem with ENFPs is that they have an inferior SI, so it's like they have poor memories, and they're super hazardous because they have like main NE. The doctors have to be super careful and meticulous, and they have to memorize everything. These are like the weaknesses of an ENFP, which would be the required things for a doctor. So yeah, like ENFPs are talented and they would be brilliant and everything, but it's just like that they have like a severe weakness for being a doctor because of the memorization and being careful and so on. So I'm like they have to be at the B tier, but I like they could like still gonna do it. Now, like ENTPs are very similar breed than the ENFP. I like ENTPs could do like even better medical analysis than an ENFP. The NETI combo is just like so much more powerful, scientifically speaking, than NETE. Now, ENTPs are not as good with the people as an ENFP. ENTPs do have high social skills. They do talk with people. They're interested about people with tertiary FE and so on. But they basically, and I, maybe I would put like the ENTP above the ENFP because of their like, they have even higher analytical skills. And almost, they don't have the same level of people skills, but they like ENTPs have like way more people skills than what would even be required for a doctor, basically. But once again, ENTPs are super hazardous. They have inferior SI. As a matter of fact, like the tertiary TE of an ENFP, like almost like they would be maybe like better at doing the like medical procedures. ENTPs would be like the brainiac doctor. ENFPs would be a little bit better at executing that shit. But yeah, like ENTPs, they would also be super hazardous and just like, being a hazardous guy with poor memory just doesn't cut it for a doctor, But because of the insane brains that like ENTPs have, like they would still be making like kind of like feasible doctors if they would get through the memorization of the medical school and so on. I don't think they would be like super talented or anything. They would be really talented in one thing, which is the medical analysis, and then be too hazardous for all of the rest of the stuff. So they have such a weakness that they would have to be at the B tier, in my view. So what else? I actually didn't like INTPs at the end of the day. They have like a TISI going on. INTPs are actually like surprisingly good at like memorizing stuff. They're kind of like the scholarly guy. I like INTPs would do way better in medical school versus the ENFP or the ENTP in like memorizing the medical data and so on. That is actually something like an INTP could basically do, you know. And there, of course, like their medical analysis would be just like way higher than like not like higher, but actually it would be higher than for the ENTP because there's so much like SI memorization going on. I actually think that like INTP's medical analysis would be even better than an ENTP's, you know, because they would remember more things and be more detail oriented with the tertiary SI. They would notice more things from the data and so on. They have like an inferior FE. INTPs have no social skills, no emotional intelligence. So that's like a super severe weakness. They're even worse with people than ISTPs. You know, they do have like a secondary NE. I like INTPs do tend to communicate a little bit better than ISTPs. You know, many times they do have that like abstract curiosity, you know, and if you were like a doctor INTP, like you actually would communicate like more than ISTP. So I actually think that like INTPs would actually surprisingly enough make for like relatively feasible doctors. I would have to say that. You know, I like it. Like I have known some INTPs, and like when they're with people, and if it's their like I mean, it would be their job to talk with people. I like INTPs can be surprisingly curious about people if there's something that piques their interest about it, and if they were like doctors, it would basically. Like I'm actually like this is a crazy thing. Like I'm tempted to put the INTP to the like A tier. You know, because INTPs, they can be kind of careful and meticulous if they really put in the effort. They can memorize things, you know. Like INTPs would be like the geek doctor. I actually, this is a crazy thing, man. I like an INTP would be like an A tier doctor. I thought they would be. I thought like an INTP would be like a surprisingly feasible doctor. I'm surprising myself here for putting the INTPs here. But like secondary NE, it makes them so curious about things that like INTPs, they do reach out to people, they ask questions, and I actually had like an INTP doctor. It's a crazy thing, but like my general practitioner like 10 years ago or something, like was like an INTP, and she was actually like a brilliant doctor. She was so curious about medical things, and she would like ask you and of course her like, you know, medical analysis was so spot on and so on. You know, I like INTPs because of their NE curiosity. They would make for better doctors than ISTPs. Like I'm just gonna say this shit, okay? You know, ISTPs are the worst communicators. You know, yeah, I like the INTP NE curiosity takes it to the A tier, and they have the, like that scholarly thing going on. There's no way around it. We're talking about medical science. It's like a field of science. You know, doctors are super like, they're scientists. That they have to figure things out, man. This is like, yeah. And the tertiary SI just makes the INTP so much better than the ENTP or the ENFP. So yeah, I'm like a crazy thing. I'm gonna put the INTP at the A tier, man. So yeah. So what about the C tier? What about the ENFJ? Yeah, like it's like hate to say this, like ENFJs, maybe the tertiary SE would give them some hands, you know, to do the procedures, but that's like a tertiary function. Like ENTJs, they have like TESE combo is like super powerful for handshakes, you know. Yeah, ENFJs, they have an inferior TI that they like logical analysis simply isn't the forte of ENFJs. Like that secondary NI is super powerful, but they have like ENFJs have a polar SI, meaning that like it's a stupid thing, but like a polar SI means that you have like like you have poor memory, poor attention to detail. This is all doctor shits. You could make the argument that SI and TI, which the ENFJ has like a polar and inferior function. Like these are like the doctor functions basically, and you're like basically like lacking on that shit. Now the secondary NI would give the ENFJ more brains, and give them some insights even about like medical stuff. But medical science, man, it is so complex. There's so many like variables in play. There's so much like details that you have to remember and notice and then do that TI logical analysis on that shit. Like I actually think like medical science wouldn't be a good field of science for the ENFJ. Like that secondary NI demands for something more abstract, something like more big picture. That there is nothing big picture about being a doctor. It's all about fucking logical details, basically. So, ENFJs do have high brains with the secondary NI, but they're the wrong kind of brains for this shit. Yeah, they would be the most talented people with people and communicating and being the compassionate. Like ENFJs would be the best doctor in like, taking you into consideration and making you feel understood as a person and so on. But unfortunately, like medical problems, they don't give a shit about your compassion, man. I'm so sorry to say this. So like, I like ENFJs. I think they could be doctors. There's a lot to be memorized, in medical school. I don't think that it would be like a good fit. I don't think that the school would be a good fit. I don't think that the medical analysis would be a good fit. I like ENFJs who still do the job, okay? But, yeah, like I'm gonna believe that the S tier. So what about the INFJ? INFJs definitely have the brains, to do some severe medical analysis with the NITI combo. They have the people skills for days. They would also be the most compassionate doctor. But INFJs, they are the most out of it with reality type in the entire system. They are living in some like fantasy castle of their own making. Like being a doctor, you need to cut the shits. You need to pay attention to physical detail. You need to memorize shits. You need to notice things in physical reality. Like medical science and being a doctor, it's like a really hard-grained field of science and activity. INFJs have like an inferior SE, a polar TE. This is like an insanely fucking like doom combo for being a doctor. Like, being a doctor, you need to be waking up. Like, you have to like live in reality, man. Like INFJs, they don't live in reality. That they live in some like fucking like some like cloud shits place, man. Doctors, they need to be living in reality, making tough choices, in real time, looking at the facts and the physical details and so on. Like INFJs, man, that like SETE, polar TE, inferior SE. I'm so sorry, but like I basically wouldn't trust my life into the hands of an INFJ. I'm so sorry to say. If it comes to some like medical procedure, some like physical shits, and INFJs, they would be missing out on so many physical details and everything that it's just like, I don't think that it would be like the fourth day of an INFJ. Like once again, like INFJs can be making like great scientists in many fields of science. I don't like medical science would be the thing. It is one of the worst fitting fields of sciences for INFJs, I think. I think they could do it. I think like, if they put in the effort, then INFJ could muster like getting through medical school and becoming a doctor and being a feasible doctor. But I don't think it would be their forte. I'm not sure if I would like recommend becoming a doctor if you're like an INFJ. Okay, now what about the INFP? Let's see. So like polar SE and inferior T, right? Yeah, INFPs are super hazardous. Yeah, INFPs can be kind of scholarly sometimes. Like INFPs can be surprisingly scholarly about shit. They do have like a secondary NE, so they're like a little bit more kind of like paying attention and being curious about the outside environment. I like INFPs. Like, who would be better, an INFP or an INFJ? It's a tough question. But I don't know, man. Like, you have to trust your hands. You have to be executing shit. You have to be careful, meticulous. You can't make any mistakes. INFPs, they are the most incompetent type in the entire system, okay, unfortunately. INFPs struggle in like with basic shits. As a doctor, like the person's life is in your hands, and you got like 30 seconds, and if you make one little mistake, the guy fucking dies. Would you give that kind of responsibility to the hands of an INFP? Yeah. Like, I don't know, man. Like, INFPs, they make for great artists, great philosophers. They are joyful and creative and funny and wonderful people. But like when shit hits the fan and everything goes to shit, then you have to be competent. Like, would the INFP be the best guy for that shit? It's like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't fucking know, man. I just like, I'm so sorry. I don't like being a doctor would be the forte of an INFP. I'm sure there's many INFP doctors out there. I'm sure that they can get the job done, but I am sure that they struggled in medical school, even more so than the ESTJ, like way 10,000 times fucking more. I don't like an ESTJ would struggle in the medical school, but an INFP would. So much to memorize, so many like random executional things you have to learn, doing the stitches and doing everything like careful and like paying attention and having your shit together and like INFPs would struggle, Yeah, but the C tier is still like a tier where like you can still do it, okay? And I have read some Reddit conversations where there was like an INFP saying that they became doctors, and if I remember correctly, they were saying that they were struggling a little bit, but they had enough motivation to go through with it. And I like, if you have enough motivation at the C tier, you can still keep on doing it. INFPs would be the most compassionate doctor, the silent, compassionate guy who would truly understand you. But this medical decision making would probably be better left to somebody else and like executing those things. I like INFPs would have enough brains, that secondary NE, like they could do the medical analysis at a feasible level, like, but I don't know, man. Like there's an abstract quality to the INFP brains, and medical analysis is a hard-grained analysis. So once again, I don't think that it would be like the perfect fit even in the way that like INFPs, brains like are powerful and so on. So yeah, it's gonna be the C tier. So what about the ISFP? I like ISFPs would probably be C tier as well. I mean, they're super good with their hands. They can have their shit together if they're focused and so on. But like ISFPs would just like lack in the, medical analysis department with their like the first brains function they have is a tertiary NI. That is a poor, medical analysis function. Inferior TE. I like ISFP just like the complex medical analysis which like escape them, and they would be really good at like doing stuff, but the whole the brain department just like wouldn't be there basically. So yeah, like I would advocate like if you're like an ISFP, like get into like a medical profession or specialty that you have to do a lot of like procedures and do things with your hands and so on. So yeah, like once again, I like you can do it. I like an ISFP might be better than an INFP or something. You know, like, I don't know, man. You are so there with reality that it helps, and you know, SE gives you, it's a weird, like, if you just like observe everything and see everything and notice everything, it's almost like you get some like brains out of it, you know. So but yeah, and like it would be the C tier. What about the ESFP? I like ESFPs would also be C tier. They would be really talented with their hands. The SETE combo would be super good for executing stuff. You know, maybe for a doctor, I actually did like a third year TE, like the SETE combo. So thinking about like doing medical analysis would be probably like better than like a third theory NI. You know, that there is a quality to medical analysis that like kind of like somehow rewards like sensory, you know, things plus TE. You know, I like ESFPs would actually maybe be like relatively good doctors. There's something like the SETE combo that, you know, they notice everything. You know, they're high people skills. They talk with you. They ask you questions, and they're like ESFPs are pretty like clever guys. They're gonna figure it out. You know, yeah, and they're like super capable with doing shit and executing and so on. I'm tempted to have the ESFP like even above the ENFJ, you know, because the ESFP like medical analysis, while it wouldn't be super complex or anything, they have like a polar TI and an inferior NI. These like the ESFPs are not the greatest analysts out there. But they're like the analysis that they do with their SET, it's like it's tight. It's weird, but like medical science requires this like tight analysis. You know, there's an executional aspect to it. That they have a TE, and I actually did like ESFPs would be like at the top of the C tier basically. You know, yeah. I like ESFPs could do it, but they have to put a lot of effort into it, and like, you know, and so on. For ESFPs, like I wouldn't recommend becoming like a ICU doctor or anything. Like I would recommend doing something like a little bit more basic, where the analysis wouldn't be that complex. But like with basic stuff where the analysis is not that complex, like I like ESFPs would be brilliant doctors. Basically, I'm almost like tempted to put them like a B tier for that shit. You know. Because they're so competent with the SET combo, man. They're so good like executing shits and noticing everything yeah, ESFPs are more clever than what you might like. Like they have a way of figuring things out, man. They have a weird way of doing it without any brains functions. Yeah. They have a weird fucking way, man. I'm gonna put them to the B tier here. I like they would actually make for like okay doctors, man. Okay. So what about the ESFJ? So let's see. Like you have like a polar NI and an inferior TI and yeah, like your own brains, like your only brains are like tertiary NE. Yeah. Like you're leading with FE, so like you have high people skills and so on. Secondary SI, like yeah, you could do the memorization. The problem with the ESFJ is that they wouldn't understand what they're memorizing. They would understand the complexities of what they're memorizing, man. And they would just get confused when it comes to like super complex medical circumstances. I'm sorry to say, but I like ESFJs might like be the only D tier type. I like ESFJs would be the one guy who just like couldn't, like you throw in any like a little bit more complex thing for an ESFJ and they just couldn't figure it out, man. You know, once again, like maybe there's some doctor specialty out there where like you don't use that much brains, man. But I'm so sorry to say this shit. I don't think that like medical science, that is like an analytical field of science. I like ESFJs just like don't make for the greatest analysts and so on. Yeah, I'm so sorry to say. I'm gonna say that the ESFJ is the only D tier. This is like the only guy where like I'm like I wouldn't recommend being a doctor. Like like even if you would like put in the effort and so on, like I wouldn't recommend doing it. It's a horrible thing to say, but ESFJ is the only type where like I'm not sure if I would trust their analysis. Like I'm so sorry. Like all of these other guys, I can imagine like figuring it out and so on. Like even these types like ISFPs and ESFPs, like even if they don't have like brains functions, they have like some like weird brains going on. But ESFJs, man, they just get confused. That's what it is. And yeah, okay. I like ESFJs make for brilliant nurses, but doctors, this is like too much complex variable analysis, too much responsibility, too much like you relying on your logic, and you have like inferior TI. I'm so sorry, and your intuitive function is your tertiary function. So it's. I'm sorry to say, I'm gonna leave the ESFJ to the D tier. Okay. So yeah, that's the list, guys, and see you in the next episode. Okay.